morning, I'm Jill Baldoff, Associate Dean Alumni Relations at UCLA Anderson and a proud member of the class of 1981. I'm really happy that you all decided to join us today for our very first Friday faculty chat. We know there are a lot of questions out there about how best to move forward in these uncertain times, how to adjust our business and our management practices to be efficient and effective. And who better to share those thoughts than faculty members from Anderson? Today, we're pleased to have with us Professor Corinne Bendersky, and I'm going to just share a screenshot that she's provided to us that gives us some, well, I was going to share my screenshot, but I think I might have picked up Corinne's desktop instead. So I'm going to go back and unshare.
I'll share on my end.
Yes, she has a slide with some resources that we thought we would share while I'm doing an introduction of Corinne. So she's from the Department of Management and Organizations. She's an expert in workplace conflict, status, justice, and inclusion in teams and organizations. Her research resonates in constructive and concrete ways, both in academics and business. She's the faculty director of Human Resource Roundtable, known as HEART, with roughly 50 corporate HR executives who share knowledge of cutting-edge human resources. As a founder of Morpho Leadership Development, she consults with corporate and public service agency executives, particularly on conflict management, diversity, and inclusion. Before we get started, let me share with you a couple of housekeeping details. You're all on mute, but we welcome your questions. So please use the Q&A feature that can be found on the bottom of your screen. Type in your question, and Professor Bendersky will try to answer as many as she can during the Q&A portion of the program. She's going to speak for somewhere around 30 to 35 minutes and follow up with Q&A. So I give you Professor Bendersky.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to participate in this faculty chat. And I am going to be talking about building a community and maintaining or sustaining or even extending a sense of interpersonal and community connectedness and engagement in a remote work environment. As Jill mentioned, I did put together a slide that has a number of resources that are hyperlinked, and I will go through a little bit of one of those resources and then ask Jill to please not just share the screen, but actually make that slide available so that all of you can go ahead and check out that. Some of them are sort of webcasts, some are articles, and one that I'll go through with you in a little bit of detail today is a wonderful resource of about 30 or 40 different virtual team building activities, exercises, and games that you can play with your team. So, you know, as we all are experiencing now, and some of us maybe have been experiencing for a lot longer in our careers, if you are a team member who works remotely some or all of the time, there are a lot of challenges of remote work and working from home. While we are each now in our own home environments and you know, we get a little bit of an insight into each other's lives. You may guess that I have a teenage boy by the Iron Maiden poster that hangs on my wall. You know, that's kind of nice to some extent, but for a large part, many of us feel isolated and disconnected from our work teams and our colleagues. We miss the spontaneous kinds of interactions that we have at work, and I'm going to go through the different categories of sort of gaps and holes that are created in a work from home environment or a remote team environment. But obviously, there are a lot of constraints that we are experiencing in our work from home environment that are new and different than what we are used to at work. And it's important to recognize that for some people, those constraints actually may make us feel like we're less capable or competent in our own tasks because we are not as facile, we're not as expert in working in this kind of a space as we are used to in our day-to-day jobs. And maybe you've been in a position or an organization for many, many years doing things a certain way. We develop a strong sense of our identity based on our competence in our professional domain. And one of the big challenges from moving to a remote context that may not really be so salient is that there is a psychological cost or consequence when the challenges and new constraints imposed by our home work environments may actually be affecting our sense of our core identity of professional competence. And so many of us are actually quite emotionally and psychologically fragile, in addition to feeling a sense of social disconnectedness or isolation. That's very important to recognize. It's also important to recognize that many of us are not just working from home ourselves, but are doing so with other members of our family, other members of our household. And each of those people together is experiencing an adjustment and a number of constraints. If you have children who are now schooling from home and probably just learned this week that they're going to be schooling from home for the rest of the academic year, depending on the age of the children, depending on the needs of the children, they may need a significant amount of oversight and support and help getting through their work days. And that's an attention draw, distraction, a coordination challenge for those of us who are working from home. Some of us may have seniors or people within our homes who need special care. That is also taken, and our home health aides, our childcare support resources, they may not be available for us the way they were prior to the COVID-19 stay-at-home order situation. And so there's a lot of juggling family responsibilities that are going to impact each individual's ability to engage and connect with their work and with their work team. Many of us are experiencing our own or a significant other's reduction in work time, change in work schedules, maybe a reduction in compensation, financial resources. And not only do those create new challenges in terms of organizing our lives, but there can also be a tremendous amount of stress, pressure, and anxiety that is also exacerbated by just the fact that we are in this kind of unbelievably terrifying pandemic situation. By the way, there is an election coming up that creates just a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the space that we're living right now. And I go through all of those different challenges to really try to bring home the point that we need to understand and be compassionate and sensitive to the context in which each of us and each of our teammates and each of our work colleagues is working under, because those constraints are going to inevitably impact the way that we're able to engage and are going to change the nature of our interactions. And so there is going to be an adjustment period, transition period, where folks aren't necessarily going to be delivering, aren't necessarily going to be committing and engaging their work the way that you're used to them doing so. And an enormous challenge of remote work and work from home environments is that when people are unpredictable in their behavior and interactions, we create all kinds of attributions and explanations in our own mind for those kinds of unexpected behaviors. And those attributions may or may not actually be, Jill, you're talking, but you seem to be muted. Jill, did you want to jump in and say something?
No, I'm very sorry. I'm fine. My internet went away. I lost you for a minute, but now I'm back.
Okay, good, glad. Okay, so you didn't want to interject into something.
No, I'm so sorry.
No. Okay, so as I was saying, one of the great challenges is when we're working remotely, we are interacting in ways that may be different than what we're used to, and so people's behavior may not people may not be behaving consistently with your expectations for them. And without really understanding the context in which they're working, we may create incorrect attributions for their behaviors that can be excessively negative or sort of just unfair. And so it's really important that as part of creating a community in a remote work environment, we enhance or we create a sense of what's called contextual knowledge about each of the team members. We understand, we share, and we understand the environment in which each person is working. That both helps create some better kind of interpersonal awareness, ability to engage in perspective taking, and familiarity. Again, my teenage son and his love of Iron Maiden maybe makes you feel a little bit more connected to me. I could show you my cat that's snoozing next to me. Jill has a moose outside her window. You know, all of these things are kind of cool to learn about each other. And also it's really helpful to understand so that we can draw correct attributions for people's behavior. And we know what we need to communicate about so that we are able to negotiate a set of interactions or an interactional space that fits with people's constraints. So it may be that a parent who has a child who requires a great deal of support during school hours is simply not going to be available to work between 8:30 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon without with a few exceptions to check in, but between 6:30 and 8:30 and between 3:30 and 7:30 they're going to be all in. And so it might require that the other members of the team kind of readjust the way that they hand off work or when they expect engagement and responses to queries from that individual. So knowing that and negotiating that up front will help a lot reduce this challenge of inappropriate attributions for unexpected behaviors. Now, building community and social connectedness, interpersonal connectedness is really important. And I want you to think about it as a really multifaceted kind of problem. I mean, virtual coffee hours and happy hours are great. And I'll provide some tips and suggestions for how to make those particularly rewarding, but those aren't going to fill necessarily every gap that people are feeling. So, excuse me, I encourage you to think about providing virtual spaces that satisfy intellectual, social, and emotional needs that your team members are experiencing. And it is better to think about how to create a virtual space for each of those kinds of interactions rather than thinking about how you can sort of recreate or translate a space or an interactional venue that you developed in a face-to-face environment, try to translate that directly into a virtual space. That often doesn't work. It often doesn't, it doesn't translate one-to-one. It's better to think about what was the connection that was being satisfied in this face-to-face interaction, and is there a way to recreate an opportunity for that connection in a virtual environment. So I'm just going to run through a couple suggestions and recommendations for ways to fulfill and create virtual spaces for satisfying intellectual, social, and emotional connection needs. A lot of the resources that I provided to you also go into more depth on those different topics, which again is why I put them together and Jill will share them with everybody. And then I also want this to be an opportunity to hear best practices and share best practices among you, among the community of alumni who are participating with us today. I'm on a task force of the Anderson faculty to engage all the different stakeholder communities throughout Anderson in these kinds of conversations. So we're talking to all the different student groups, faculty groups, staff groups, and what has come out beyond what the major theme that has come out from the focus groups across all these different communities is how much creativity and energy there is, and how powerful it is when the members of the community can define and identify a virtual interaction that really connects with the distinctive interests of the members of that community. So I'll give you some general suggestions, but then I encourage you to share some more particular ones that maybe you've come up with, and ask any specific questions that you have. So we will definitely open this up for Q&A. So in terms of intellectually, as I said, one of the great challenges is the sense of a lack of contextual knowledge, not really understanding the environment in which people are working. And so it's important to spend some time as a team, especially if you are in an interdependent work team that works closely together, spend some time talking about each person's work from home situation. It could be that you rotate giving each other tours of your personal space. It's an opportunity to learn about one another's home life, one another's hobbies and interests. I will share with you, again, this virtual team building activities resource. There's a lot of really nice icebreaker activities. So you could use something structured like that. The point, though, is to use it as an opportunity to really share candidly what each person's work from home environment is like, so that we can understand how best to help coordinate, support, and adapt to each other's work from home reality. Second, we all really miss the spontaneous, non-work related, not social, but like conversations about what's current events or office politics or popular culture, things that are intellectually stimulating but not necessarily task specific. And that's a very a real gap that pretty much every remote worker feels. And so creating opportunities for perhaps as a group watching a webinar like something like today, there's all kinds of thought leaders who are putting content out that's relevant to the working in, living in the COVID-19 scenario that we're in. You could sort of create watch parties and then host a follow-up discussion with some focused, targeted questions. And that's one of my real strong recommendations across all of these, is you don't just bring people together, but you bring people together with a focus and a target and something specific for them to be interacting with. Other types of shared intellectual spaces that you can create in a virtual are sort of book clubs or article clubs. So again, you sort of assign a specific reading and everybody's going to read up on it, and then you follow up with a discussion. It could be similarly a podcast. It could be anything that that will satisfy the particular intellectual interests and curiosities of your team. It may even be office related. Many organizations are holding town halls. There's a lot of hopefully regular communication from the leadership. It could be then that your group has a discussion around the communication that's coming from the higher up in the organization and figuring out what's the impact, what's the relevance, what's the implication for our group. And again, it's not necessarily specifically a task-focused interaction, but it's an intellectual interaction that helps fill the gap that is created by our inability to interact with one another spontaneously. Now, I see a Q&A question here. And so I'm going to pop into that before I move on to the next topic. So Ann Morris asks, some people may be very uncomfortable with the idea of showing coworkers around their home or introducing them to their family or pet. All of that seems private and separate from work life. That's a great point, Ann, and I would say there's a tremendous amount of variability in that. And it's important to be sensitive to people's preferences and concerns, and also to invite people to present themselves as authentically as they feel comfortable doing. And I think that's one of the real both challenges and opportunities that are presented by this kind of virtual remote work and work from home context, is you can create opportunities for people to present themselves authentically however they want. And if someone says, you know, I'm not going to show you my pets, I'm going to just focus on the professional work environment that I have created in my home, so that you understand that I've got all the technology that I need, or you understand that there's a particular schedule that I'm sticking to. That's great too. You may have experimented a little bit with some of the virtual backgrounds that are available through Zoom. I find they don't particularly work well with my camera. It looks like I'm kind of lost in space. But for others who aren't comfortable with people being able to see the background of their home home workspace, I recommend and encourage you to play with different kinds of virtual backgrounds that essentially create a visual guard. Now recognize that when you are putting up that background that creates that virtual background that creates a barrier to observing the environment in which you're working, other people will have a harder time understanding and recognizing the context that you're in. So it's important that you invite everyone and you yourself communicate the constraints and resources that you have and that you're working under from home to the extent that those will impact the way that you interact with each other. Beyond that, it really is up to you and the members of your team to figure out how you how you will most benefit from getting to know each other in that environment. Okay, so let me move on to social spaces. So as I said before, don't try to recreate your office social dynamics in a virtual space. Rather, find ways to connect with each other socially in a virtual space. I'm going to, in a moment, share my screen with you and review some of the virtual team building activities that are in the resource I'm sharing with you. What I like about it, it has excellent team building activities, from icebreakers to problem solving exercises to behavioral patterns and preferences. So there's a lot of different ways in which your team can use some kind of virtual activity to get to know each other at multiple levels of depth. I do recommend that when you are bringing people together in for social connection in a virtual space, that you liberally use breakout rooms to mix people up into smaller discussion groups. You can assign people to specific teams in advance, like you may have sub-working groups that you want to create a space for them to interact with each other. And I encourage you to experiment with the Zoom breakout room functions so that you're able to learn how to sort of very flexibly assign people to specific teams. Or you can use the breakout room function to automatically and randomly push people out into breakout groups with sort of different random subsets of the people in the room together. As long as you give those breakout groups a specific discussion topic, something concrete that they are going to be talking about together, then those are really nice ways to kind of move between a large space to a smaller space, a large space to a smaller space. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now and show you the some of the virtual team building activities that are in this. Sorry, I'm working between two different screens here, and let me just get everything on the right page. Okay, so if I share my screen, I don't know. I'm sorry, Jill, I'm seeing that the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Can you provide screen sharing privileges to me, please?
Sure, let me try and fix that.
You can also just make me the host if that's faster.
You're now the host.
Okay, great. Okay, so can you see my shared screen? It should say virtual team building activities.
Yes.
Okay, so this is what you get through the hyperlink in the resources file that Jill will share with you that says virtual team building activities. And I'm just going to scroll through it very quickly so that you can see it has a whole bunch of virtual icebreaker activities. These are nice ways potentially to structure a sort of getting to know you, getting to understand the home environment. That was the teenage son I was talking about, that people are working in. And there's a lot. Some of them use cards, some of them, I like this one, icebreaker bingo. And there's just a whole bunch here. There are also, and I know I'm scrolling through them quickly because I want to move and show you that there are a bunch of activities that she calls brain break and movement activities. Those of you who've spent all day in front of a Zoom camera, these are really, really nice ways to break things up a little bit. And then there are activities that focus on sort of getting to know the members of the team at a deeper level, focus on behavioral preferences and perspectives, and even more down the road on sort of developing virtual team problem-solving skills. So there's a lot of resources in this document that I encourage you to look through, and there are a lot of other resources like this available on the internet that are being sort of released for public use. And I really do encourage you to try to find the right structure of, or the right set of activities that structure your social interactions, your virtual interactions, to accomplish the goals that you're trying to accomplish. Okay, so I just stopped my screen share, and okay, I see that there's stuff going on in the chat, but Jill, it looks like you're on it all. So let me talk about, I was just talking about bringing people together in like a big Zoom, say a happy hour, and using breakout rooms to encourage people to have connect with smaller groups and have focused discussions. I also suggest that if you are going to create a virtual happy hour or a virtual coffee break, that there are ways to make them more engaging if you have themes. So for example, it may be that you provide a drink recipe, an alcoholic version and a non-alcoholic version ahead of time, and encourage everybody to make that drink and come together sort of with a common cocktail or mocktail. I've heard some really fun sounding wine and beer tastings where people have identified specific bottles of wine or beer that people have acquired ahead of time, and then they do a tasting together of the different options. You can do a cooking or eating version of that where there is a recipe, maybe somebody leads a cooking demonstration, and then you kind of have a virtual dinner or lunch together, or you may have a dress code, a wacky hat dress code, or something that just makes it a little bit more thematically interesting than just, hey, let's meet and get together at a particular time. And also you may play games like have a trivia night or a particular card game or something like that. So my main point is that just bringing people together in a virtual space does not necessarily create a social interaction. So themes, games, and ways to engage people more concretely and in a more focused way seem to work better. Another suggestion I just heard this morning from a focus group with our Masters of Financial Engineering students is that subset of students, there's a real group of hardcore gamers. And so for them, they're creating gaming tournaments as a way to connect socially and really engage with one another around some common interests. So as I said earlier, one of the key things is to figure out ways to connect the specific interests of your groups, and I thought that was a terrific idea. Finally, I encourage you to think about ways to break down silos and build new bridges across subgroups that are easier to do in a virtual space than maybe in a face-to-face environment. If you are working in a geographically distributed team or multinational organizational context, it's a lot easier to kind of meet on an equal plane in a virtual space than sometimes it is in our face-to-face environments, where those who are co-located together naturally are bonded more together, and those who are distributed don't feel so included, don't feel so connected across. So, you know, if you can think about ways in which you can leverage the current situation, not just how do we overcome the challenges, but really how do we embrace the opportunities, perhaps you can build longer term bridges across subgroups within your environment in ways that enhance a sense of inclusion, belonging, connectedness, and community, even going forward once the restrictions on our movements and activities are reduced. And one way to do that is if you have a subset, and particularly smaller subsets of colleagues who work remotely normally or who are in distributed locations normally, this is a great opportunity for them to step up and take the lead on some activities and events that really leverage their expertise with virtual work and really highlights them and their centrality within the group. And that's a good idea that's a way to increase connection and inclusion that can be leveraged going forward. Okay, are there some questions that I can pause and take answers to right now? Okay, so I'm opening up the Q&A. So thoughts on what a max number of people are for a virtual happy hour? At what point are people just talking over each other? Yeah, if we must have a big event with say 15 people, how do we manage that issue? So that's where I would really utilize the breakout room function in Zoom. I like it, and depends again on the nature of the group that's coming together. I think that once you have more than 5 or 6 people in a virtual space, it is hard for everyone to actually connect authentically with one another. So anything more than 5 or 6, I think it's worthwhile to, at least for some period, maybe it's even just 5 or 10 minutes, if you have an hour-long break, happy hour organized, to say, okay, we're going to push into breakout rooms. And I really like the function within Zoom of being able to randomly assign people to breakout rooms. If you've not experienced it before, what you do is you set the number of rooms. So you can just say, depending on how many people are on the are in the space, we've got 150 people here. Maybe we want to create 15 breakout rooms, and it will randomly assign 10 people to each breakout room. And then those subgroups can have some more closer interactions with each other. And again, I just reiterate that when you do that, you give people a purpose, you give them a discussion topic, you give them an icebreaker activity. Then you can bring people back together. And if you clear that initial breakout room assignment, you can do it again down the road and create brand new groups and enable people to interact and meet with different subsets of people in smaller connections. Okay, the next question is, how often would you want to implement those team building activities? Is it a weekly thing, monthly, quarterly? I think that really does depend on the specifics of the group that you're trying to connect with. If this is your primary work group and you work together on a regular basis, like on a daily basis, your work is really highly interdependent, then I encourage, at least some kind of social or intellectual or emotional connection activity every day, certainly weekly. If you're talking about your entire organization or your entire division, it may be that it's more like a every other week happy hour, something like that. If you're talking about more like a town hall kinds of communication, it may make sense to be monthly, although I really think that in the current situation, because there's so much uncertainty and there's so much evolution and rapid change, that ongoing communication and regular touch-ins, regular touch points are helpful. So I would do it more as often as you're able to get participation and without it being disruptive to your work. Any other questions at this point before I move on to talk about creating emotional support? Okay, so the third gap that many remote workers feel and that many of us are struggling with in our current environment is a space where we can feel emotionally supported through our work colleagues. It's helpful, it's important, and to allow people to be vulnerable with one another, facilitating that really facilitates authentic connections and enables commiseration and compassion. That's really valuable for our mental and emotional well-being. Now, per the earlier question, not everybody is going to be comfortable with that. Not everybody is going to want to engage in that. But there's undoubtedly at least a subset of people you work with who would really appreciate and benefit from opportunities to connect with people on an emotional level. Now, there are different ways that you may do it. Slack channels are really effective, a very effective tool for creating groups around common issues and common interests. And they can be, sort of just interest groups, or they can be specifically called support groups. For instance, you may have a Slack channel for people who are really struggling with childcare and homeschooling, or a Slack channel who are really struggling with elder care, or a Slack channel for people who are struggling with financial and job insecurity, et cetera, whatever it is. And you can have those be community developed. You don't have to impose the Slack channels. You can provide a resource for people to identify the needs or the interests that they would like to connect with others on, and then have that just be a self-selection. These can be facilitated by your EAP or AHR leaders within the organization, or they can be peer support groups that are just organized internally. You may also want to do something like this for your employee resource groups, and encourage those employee resource groups to provide support not only for the members of the ERGs, but also to open up their community to other people, again, as a way to build bridges between subgroups within your organization. And finally, another tool that you may want to consider for helping to maintain emotional support and emotional and psychological well-being is to establish mentorship and coaching relationships that have regular interpersonal check-ins, regular emotional check-ins, but either on a one-on-one basis or a very, very small group basis. Those can be organized formally, they can be encouraged informally. That's just another kind of structure that can achieve that same type of emotional support. And the last thing I want to talk about are providing sort of wellness classes that members of your organization are all able to engage in. These could be yoga, guided meditation, or other kind of fitness classes. You can set up fitness challenges that people participate in. These are just, there's a lot of different ideas, there are a lot of different ways in which you might be, you can try to engage members of your team, of your organization in community activities and in ways of engaging with one another interpersonally, through intellectual, through social, and through emotional support channels. What I'd like to do now, so I'm going to go ahead and share the resources screen, that number that I've referred to. I will say that the value of the resources screen comes from the things that are hyperlinked within it. So this is just going to, navigating to the screen that enables me to share screens. So this is just a kind of a heads up of what you will be receiving from Jill afterwards. And each of these is a hyperlink to a resource that's on this topic. So I'll leave that up and open up the Q&A, invite Q&A now. And what I really particularly would invite is you sharing best practices and ways in which you and your team have managed to address or fill the gaps with respect to the intellectual, social, and emotional needs of your community. Would you share some ideas for wellness programming during this time of working virtually? Yeah, so I'm a little hesitant to share any specific recommendations because I don't want to be endorsing, one instructor over another. But I will point out that there are an enormous number of 15 to 30 minute yoga, Pilates, guided meditation that are provided free on YouTube, that instructors all over the world have been uploading and providing for free to support the community. So I would say if you want to task one member of your team with kind of reviewing and finding the ones that seem to satisfy the group's interest in terms of time commitment and approach, that you'll be able to find those resources out there. One of our MBA student groups is doing a 30-day abs challenge, and I think there's something like 200 students that are participating in that. I'm really curious when we all come back together, I'm going to be facing a classroom of people with Rick washboard abs as a result of it. So, I'm not sure where they got that, but I believe it's also just a free fitness resource. Next question, would you say there are big mistakes in people doing the Zoom and breakout? I'm sorry, what would you say are the biggest mistakes people make in doing the Zoom and breakouts? I think the biggest mistake is either not using the breakouts and having 20 people all in a Zoom meeting, not really able to interact with each other constructively, or using the breakouts but not guiding them in any way. So people may go into the breakout room and not know what to talk about, especially if you're trying to use those as a tool to enable people to be introduced to others in the group, or maybe to interact with people that they don't typically interact with. If you don't give them a topic, a question, an icebreaker activity, that can be very awkward. And so people would just sit there and use the time to, check their email and just wait to come back. So I think those are both challenging. The next question, we are using Zoom as an organization and it's working really well. It could get daunting to learn many new tools. You mentioned Slack, which we don't use. Is it possible to use Zoom breakout room feature instead? So Slack is it's more like a group chat feature. It has some of the benefits of like a group WhatsApp chat with some of the integrated functionality of like Instagram and other kinds of social media tools. So Slack is kind of a nice mixed media tool, but the main thing that it's useful for is bringing subgroups together to communicate within themselves around things that they may do, coordinate activities or content, sort of curate content that's specifically attractive to the members of the group. So I think you can absolutely do that. Microsoft Teams is another tool that, so the short answer is Zoom is probably not the optimal tool for doing this, but you could just use email threads, you could use WhatsApp chat groups, you could look into Microsoft Teams. The point is what you're trying to create is an organic sort of community bottoms up based way for people who identify that they have a certain set of interests in common to coordinate their interactive activities with each other and to share content that's relevant just to that subgroup. So there are a lot of different tools to do it. Next question, what is a typical amount of time people feel comfortable in breakout rooms with people they don't know? I would say 10 minutes, and that's with a specific icebreaker activity. If, however, it's a subgroup of a sub-working group and there's some concrete tasks that they are working on together in that subgroup, and then they're developing some kind of a takeaway resource that they're contributing back to the rest of the larger group, then obviously that may require more time in the breakout group. So it really depends on what the nature of their activity is. How would you approach security issues that are growing with Zoom? That's an excellent question. UCLA is recommending that we password protect all of our Zoom meetings, so our Zoom invitations include passwords, and also that you have people sign, and there's a setting where you can only have people participate who have registered accounts. I actually honestly haven't experimented with that too much. I think Zoom itself is also making adaptations to try to make it a little bit more secure. So I would say I'm not the right person to answer that question because that's something I'm learning about myself. But I do appreciate you bringing up the fact that there are ways to make Zoom meetings more or less secure, and that you should work with your IT professionals to figure out what's the most secure way to do it. Next, we've participated in fun photo challenges each week, like recreate a famous piece of artwork using the things at your home. That's a terrific idea. Thank you for sharing it. I hope people have really embraced that, and that's opened up a big box of creativity. Another question here in the Q&A, examples of practices that enable team connection without adding new times to meet. Start every meeting with an individual check-in. What's going on with them at every level that they want to share. It connects everyone at the emotional level before jumping into the work. And that's a terrific practice, whether you're live, face-to-face, or virtual. It's a great way to just kind of all connect and be present at the beginning of your interactions. Were there some people who had their hands up who wanted to ask questions who haven't done so in the text box. Am I missing? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to scroll down. Okay, next question. What are some good ways to deal with awkwardness of technical glitches and limited bandwidth in a virtual meeting? I've been in so many meetings where people are cutting in and out, can't be heard, have awkward delays. Honestly, the best thing to do is just to be patient, tolerant, and compassionate of the fact that we are all trying to figure it out. Do recognize that we don't always know when we are cutting out to other people, and so you could formalize some norms within your team about how you're going to alert one another if someone is having technical issues, so that they know they have to repeat themselves. This is just a time that requires a lot of patience. Next question, what would you recommend to address demotivation, lack of engagement, community, or accountability? I think this is a great opportunity to leverage your feedback and coaching skills. It may be that it is a one-on-one conversation that needs to be had as opposed to something, or it could be something that's collective. Oftentimes when people are acting demotivated or are appearing disengaged, it's because they're feeling that some source of reward is missing for them. And I don't mean financial reward, something that drives them to be engaged in the work is missing. And you might want to reach out and ask with that kind of a language to see if there's any way in which you or the other members of your group could provide resources or ways of interacting with each other that would be more satisfying and would help engage and motivate the person who's been kind of disengaged. Next question is, what's a nice icebreaker activity to start the meeting? I'm going to refer you to the virtual team building activities resource that I shared. They have like 15 really good ideas in there. So Jill, I think we're getting to about the scheduled stop time. Do you want to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that. And, oh, I see, it's up here.
Corinne, thank you so much. This was just tremendous. And everybody, thank you for being so flexible also with, I was picking up questions in chat and trying to get you to use Q&A because Corinne can only look at so many screens as she's doing her presentation. But I think we all got some absolutely fabulous ideas. I know I did, and I can hardly wait to work with my group. One of our alums suggested that everyone just wants to say hello in the chat. We can actually see where you're coming from. I know we have an alum who's listening from Paris, which is absolutely fabulous. Corinne, again, thank you so much. So much food for thought. I promise you, everyone, I will send you a link so that you will be able to see all of the materials, because as someone asked, what happens when you have a technical glitch? Well, I disappeared for 5 minutes. I was just praying the whole thing had not cratered. So it was really a great first Friday faculty chat. I want to remind you, every Friday we'll be having this at the exact same time. Next week, it's Professor Hal Hirschfield, Decision Making During Uncertain Times. Followed by that, we'll have Cassie Mogliner-Holmes. She deals with the idea of happiness. Then our perennial favorite, Jerry Nicholsberg, will talk about the forecast. And then Miguel Unzueta will talk a little bit about the organization of businesses. So be sure to register. Thank you all for being there. And again, Corinne, absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.